You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 20th of September 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Joe Biden hosts a meeting of Asian allies in his own hometown. We'll hear from...
I'm Fiona Wilson in Tokyo. I'll be talking about the outgoing Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's trip to the US.
Looking forward to that, Fiona. After that, we'll head to Greenland and our man in the city with the unpronounceable name...
I'm Bruno Kaufmann in Kokotok, and I'll have the latest news from the biggest island on Earth, Greenland, and its push for independence.
We'll also check in on the Labour Party's first conference since taking power in the UK. We'll explore how Taiwan has become embroiled in the Lebanon pager explosions despite having nothing to do with them. And we'll get a tech update from Monocle's own David Phelan. All that right here on the Friday Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. The next week is going to see a flurry of diplomatic activity as leaders from around the world descend on New York for the annual pilgrimage that is the United Nations General Assembly. As part of their trip, many will not be able to resist a stop in Washington or thereabouts for a meeting with the outgoing President Joe Biden. Among those side summits is a meeting of the Quad, the four-way grouping of leaders from the US, Australia, India, and Japan. Biden is bringing them to his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware. Well, I'm joined by Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor. For more on this, Fiona, before we get to the Quad, Japan is facing its own leadership race, of course, right now. And you've been seeing some bizarre billboards around Tokyo. The match, it's being billed as like a boxing match over there.
Yeah, I mean, these very dramatic billboards have gone up. And actually, not just billboards, they're turning up on social media as well. If you've got a moment, do a little The Match LDP Google. I mean, the LDP is just this absolutely, it's the most successful party. It's ruled Japan for the last 65 out of 69 years. And the poster, I mean, poster doesn't cover it, is a billboard. It's covering the LDP headquarters. Has 26 leaders that they've had since the party was founded. And it's interesting, I can imagine there was all sorts of politics about the size of the photograph. So some people are definitely bigger than others. So I bet that was a bit contentious, including the father of one of the front runners, Junichiro Koizumi, who was a very successful prime minister. And his son is now, he's probably one of the front runners to take over as prime minister next week.
I mean, it is amazing that they're sort of leaning into this grunge match between all of their candidates, given how many sort of changes they've had. I do wonder what that says for Fumio Kishida, the current prime minister, and kind of what his role is at the moment. I mean, is he going to be trading war stories with Joe Biden in the US? They're celebrating a kind of swan song over there.
I mean, you can just imagine, can't you? It's quite a strange time to be having a big diplomatic summit, to be honest, isn't it? Because Kishida definitely is on his farewell tour. You know, he's popping into the UN. He's just been in South Korea, saying goodbye to the president there, who he's had a very good relationship with. So, yeah, you do feel like it's quite unclear. I'm sure they said there's going to be a summit. You know, there's going to be a statement coming out of the summit. And, you know, I think the idea is what the White House really wants to impress on people is that the Quad doesn't depend on the people in charge. It's an enduring grouping of four countries. And, you know, the aims won't change even if the people at the top change.
Well, that is exactly the question, isn't it? Because, of course, the U.S. is facing elections as well. What is your sense of the role that the Quad currently plays? And are there any questions about sort of its durability as a grouping?
Well, I mean, you know, if you think, as China does, that its sort of key strategic point is to contain China, you'd have to say it's not been that successful, really. It was always, you know, Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister who was assassinated in 2022. It was one of his projects, you know, back in 2007. He started up the Quad, and it was always about a free and open Indo-Pacific. It was really concentrated on keeping the Pacific open. It's all about, containing China is what the subtext is, which really, really annoys China. But obviously in Biden's tenure, there have been many other distractions. I mean, you've obviously had Ukraine, you've got Gaza now. And I think there's a question about how much has the US really pivoted towards this Indo-Pacific ambition. So I think it's been on hold. There are also question marks about the role, about the role of India in what's going on with Russia. I think Modi is trying to present himself as a bit of a broker, maybe, between Russia, the West. It's quite hard to see at the moment, but clearly containing China has slightly gone off the agenda, although if you're in Japan, it feels very much should be at the top of the agenda.
Well, and if we do look at Japan's foreign policy, I mean, you could kind of combine them, I suppose, but whether it's containing China, but also the war in Ukraine and how kind of relatively outspoken Japan has been on that as well. Do you get the sense that they want to play a more vocal role in these sorts of defense gatherings like the Quad right now?
Definitely. I think it really took people in Japan by surprise, actually, how strong Fumio Kishida was. He came out immediately supporting Ukraine, very critical of Russia, imposed all sorts of sanctions. And it was difficult for Japan because Japan already has a rather tense relationship with Russia. So, he was certainly sticking his neck out. And, yeah, I think he is a very, very seasoned foreign minister. He was a very long-standing foreign minister before he was prime minister. So I think, it sort of reflects his role, before being prime minister. Yeah, I think it was also Shinzo Abe's ambition that Japan would have a proper diplomatic role that matched its economy, even if it cannot, by its own constitution, have a sort of a normal army.
Well, and Kishida is not necessarily, though, the only one from what I understand. I mean, to go back to the leadership race for who succeeds him, one of the contenders, the defense minister, has, I understand, raised the specter of an Asian version of NATO. He's suggested turning Anzac into Janzac. Is that realistic?
Yeah, you're talking about Shigeru Ishiba. Now, he has tried to be prime minister. I think this is his fifth time of asking. He's a very, very, veteran, I think would be the word used for him. And he's big on foreign policy. He has been a defense minister, as you say. He's very publicly supportive of Taiwan. He's not, in fact, Sanae Takaichi, who he's up against, a woman who's really come out of, not obscurity, but she was never expected to be a front runner. She is now one of the three front runners. She's much tougher on China. You would definitely describe her as hawkish. Ishiba is, his positions generally fall sort of centre-left, I would say. He's not on the right of the party, but he has talked about this Asian NATO. I think there's a sense that really a lot of these problems in Asia, Asian countries need to, get more involved and take responsibility, which I suppose is, where the Quad could play its role. But it's always been difficult, and obviously the US is just absolutely critical to security in Asia.
Well, and just finally then on the US specifically, to what extent are these leaders looking at the US elections? Is that a topic among this leadership race? Because, of course, also Japan was one of the first time around that Donald Trump was president to actually meet with him and sort of lead in trying to create a relationship with him. Is that the same thing this time around, or is there more worry?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, that's absolutely right. Shinzo Abe really, he played a blinder there, didn't he? Because he got in very, very quickly, and it did pay dividends in a way. But, it was never easy for Japan when Donald Trump was president, many different reasons. But, whether it was North Korea or the way he spoke about Japan, the way he dealt with Japan. But, how much worse would it have been if Shinzo Abe hadn't gone? I think the difficulty at the moment is we don't know who will be running Japan. I mean, this election is on, the 27th. It's next week. And at the moment, you've got 3 candidates who are very, very close. You've got 9 candidates in total. So that's very unclear. So nobody has got the nerve really to start talking about how they would be dealing with, the US when they don't even know who the leader will be there. I think, obviously, once it becomes clearer on either side, yes, definitely, it's very, very important. The Japan-US security alliance is absolutely critical.
Fiona, I'm sure we'll be checking in with you next week as the election takes place as well. That was Fiona Wilson, Monocle's person in Tokyo. Now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. The United Nations peacekeeping force stationed in southern Lebanon has warned of a heavy intensification of hostilities in the region in the last 12 hours and called for de-escalation after Israeli warplanes carried out their most intense strikes on southern Lebanon in nearly a year of war. The UN Security Council will hold an emergency meeting today to discuss the situation. In the Netherlands, a man has been killed and another injured in a stabbing incident in Rotterdam. According to witnesses cited by national media, the assailant shouted in Arabic before the attack. Police said the man was overpowered by authorities and bystanders, and they were still investigating the motive. And Brussels Airlines says it will have to cancel most of its flights on the 1st of October due to a strike of security workers across Belgium that will impact security screenings. More than 150 flights will be cancelled in the Belgian capital, and it comes after a round of strikes at Belgium's Charles de Gaulle airport earlier this month. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. To Greenland now, which is opening a new parliamentary session this afternoon and could be headed for early elections. Greenland, of course, is not its own nation, despite Donald Trump once trying to buy the island. Rather, it is a territory of Denmark, but there have been increasing stirrings about independence in Greenland, which is what makes these early elections particularly interesting. And I'm joined now from Greenland by Bruno Kaufmann, journalist and Swiss Broadcasting Company's global democracy correspondent. Bruno, you are joining us from where exactly? I'm going to have you pronounce this for us because I don't dare.
Yes, I'm in the south of Greenland, the biggest city here called Qaqortoq.
Say it once more.
Qaqortoq.
Thank you very much for that. Now, the Parliament of Greenland, it is the biggest island in the world. It is opening its session this afternoon. The Prime Minister will be speaking. Why is this important?
Yeah, because it could be really like that the Prime Minister Mutte Egede could announce early elections. He has been in power for 3.5 years as the leader of the left-wing Independence Party together with the Social Democrats. And they are doing well both in economy and you can say also politically. So he could use this momentum and call for early elections to consolidate its powers because he feels that Greenland is really in the eyes of geopolitics, also a little bit based on the new tensions between the East and the West. You can see that the Arctic is a place where interests from the big powers are converging, and Greenland is here very central. And that's also an opportunity for the Greenlandic government.
And that's what's kind of interesting, isn't it? This status that Greenland has, because it does play a role, a geopolitical role, as you're mentioning there, although it is also part of Denmark. What is the kind of status of Greenland today, and where does the Prime Minister himself stand on that?
Yeah, Greenland has been controlled and under foreign control for many centuries. And you can say that in 1953, when Greenland was under Danish control, Denmark incorporated Greenland as its territory into Denmark. And that wasn't to the benefit of the Greenlanders, because, of course, Denmark just implemented its own policy. So in 1979, Greenland gained some autonomy, and they also left then the European Union, for instance, by a referendum. So what happened in 2016 in Britain happened already in Greenland in the 1980s. And most importantly, 2008, then Greenland, after referendum, got self-government, which means that they can basically decide about most issues themselves, especially also controlling the important natural resources. So now it's all about international importance, about their autonomy on international plates, regarding, for instance, the cooperation with the United States, which still have an important base in the north in Thule, but also when it comes to Denmark, which represents Greenland still in the United Nations. And Greenland wants to have more of a say. They say nothing about us, and nothing about us without us.
And so Greenland, in a way, was the Irish border problem before UK and Ireland had this Irish border problem. But how ready do you feel Denmark is to give Greenland even more autonomy than it already has, perhaps even let Greenland actually declare independence?
Yeah, there I see little appetite because, you have to see that Denmark is by size 50 times smaller than Greenland, but has 100 times more of a population. So, and economically, of course, Denmark is much more powerful than Greenland. And it's also through Greenland that Denmark has a role in the Arctic. And that makes Denmark also willing to pay a lot of money to Greenland. And in fact, every year, the Danish taxpayers, they transfer 10,000 euro per capita in Greenland to Greenland, which makes this contribution the biggest contribution of the annual budget, about 60%. But on the other side, also, there is a history of abuse, Danish abuse in Greenland, which makes the Danes have a very, conscious idea about they have to be cautious about Greenland and very friendly, because there has been a lot of abuse against families. The Danish doctors, they sterilized the Greenlandic women, they forced adoptions. So Greenland has a strong moral position, and they want to use that, for instance, now when it comes to having an Arctic ambassador in the Arctic Council for Denmark, and also having a bigger role in the Nordic Council. So Greenland is in a strong position, and Denmark is very cautious.
Well, and as I understand, the Prime Minister himself is interested in strengthening Greenland's case for independence. But is that something that you expect to take hold within Greenland itself, whether Denmark wants it or not? Do you feel like Greenlanders want to push this case for independence themselves?
In a way, of course, they want, because, they are a very proud population, a very proud country with their own culture, their own Inuit language. So they are willing to push for that. But at the same time, as we already talked about, Greenland has a challenge when it comes to resources, not only financial ones, but also human ones. I'm currently here in the south of Greenland, and the director here of the municipality said that it's really a difficult situation here because there's a lack of teachers, a lack of social workers. There are so many opportunities, but in a way, the Greenlanders themselves, they lack these resources. So that means that there are also a lot of problems when it comes to families here, social problems with alcohol, with domestic violence, with suicide. So there is not really yet a recipe for Greenlandic full independence, as for instance, you can see Iceland managed to really make this bridge from a small Arctic island to become a global stakeholder. This is still to come in Greenland, and when that comes, that's an open question.
Well, Bruno, we will leave you to check in on the new parliamentary session and speech from the Prime Minister, and your reporting in the town of, pronounce it one more time for me.
It's Kokotok.
Bruno Kaufmann from Swiss Broadcasting Corporation. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Chermack. Here in the UK, the Labour Party, fresh off a victory in parliamentary elections earlier this year that saw it gain power for the first time in some 15 years, is this weekend holding its first party conference since those elections. The mood should be buoyant, even if Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in the middle of the first semi-scandals of his young leadership, catching flack for a series of donations and gifts that he declared a little bit late. I'm joined now by broadcaster and former UK government advisor Peter Cardwell. Peter, great to have you on the show. You are going to be in Liverpool for this party conference, and I wanted to start with what we can expect from Keir Starmer himself. He spent a lot of time complaining over the last few months about what he's inherited. Is this the moment when he pivots?
I think it probably is, because he's given us a lot of doom and gloom. I was in the garden of Downing Street when he made a speech a couple of weeks ago talking about just how difficult things are. He talked about a £22 billion black hole that he says was left by the Conservative Party financially, and many of the problems in terms of the prison system, running out of prison places and having to release offenders early, for example. What I think he will try to pivot towards is a form of hope and optimism, to say, to the party faithful in Liverpool, well done. A famous victory, 411 MPs out of the UK's 650 MPs are now Labour. He is master of all he surveys. He says, of course, that there are many problems to fix, but nonetheless, he has the mandate to do so.
Well, and what is the expectation among the rank and file there? What will they be looking for from him? Because it has been a few months now, and as we mentioned there, he kind of has to start owning this premiership now. This isn't necessarily about, a whole new direction, of course, in a few months, but a progress report, perhaps?
Yes, I think so. It is just 11 weeks in, but nonetheless, there are people who say maybe the time has come for the new Labour government to stop blaming the previous government. Although when the budget comes up, his Chancellor, Finance Minister Rachel Reeves, the first woman in that role, she is going to give her budget of the 30th of October. And certainly this period between the conference and October, there'll be lots looked at in terms of the money situation. Today, the Bank of England has talked about quantitative tightening rather than loosening, and perhaps another £10 billion of headroom within the UK budget. In terms of what Keir Starmer wants to deliver, well, he's got a radical programme of change for the National Health Service here in the United Kingdom. He's talked about wanting change in terms of 1.5 million new homes right across the United Kingdom as well. Get Britain building is the phrase they're using. So there's a lot to do. Public services are really not working as they should in the UK at the moment, and that led into a lot of frustration with the previous Conservative government. And Labour has a big task ahead of it, but nonetheless the mandate to do so.
And Peter, how much have these first sort of semi-scandals, the donation thing, how much has that, I guess, taken the shine off of Keir Starmer in these first 11 weeks? Is that going to play a role at the party conference at all, or will Labour just kind of ignore it?
They'll try to ignore it, but it's very difficult to ignore them. In a series of interviews yesterday with regional broadcasters, Keir Starmer was asked repeatedly about a corporate box he now uses at Arsenal Football Club, about suits that were bought for him and glasses, spectacles that were bought for him by a donor, dresses for his wife as well, and the fact that he as an MP has got over £100,000 worth of free things, all of it which has to be declared, of course. And in the last parliament, he was one of the top MPs to do that. Now, lots of people want Keir Starmer to come to their event. They want to induce him to do so. But there are people sort of saying, well, actually, did you need those Taylor Swift tickets? Do you need that corporate box? Couldn't you have paid for those suits yourself? You're a highly paid person, certainly paid, a great, nearly 10 times as much as the average salary in the United Kingdom. So, yes, those scandals will continue, I think, but also Keir Starmer is basically untouchable, and the opposition Conservative Party still doesn't have a new leader after the election.
Well, and just finally, Peter, on foreign policy, I wonder if you could say a word on that, particularly with what's happening in Gaza and Lebanon. Is that something that is going to encroach on this party conference? Are we expecting Keir Starmer to talk about it at all? This has been a difficult subject for Labour in the past.
I think they will a bit. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has certainly called for an immediate ceasefire. He doesn't want there to be a ground war between Israel and Lebanon, certainly, and Labour's stated policy is to recognise a state of Palestine. They have, within recent weeks, suspended some licences, about 10% of the licences for munitions to Israel, but still the United Kingdom is a strong ally of Israel, and I think that will probably continue as time goes on. But certainly Ukraine, the Russian relationship, and of course Israel-Gaza will be talked about quite a lot at the party political conference, but there is much more of a domestic focus.
Peter Cardwell, broadcaster, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing, and now, as we were just mentioning, Lebanon continues to reel from a series of explosions of pagers and radios used by the militant group Hezbollah. But a side issue to this has been the origins of those pagers, with rumors spreading wildly about where they were produced and which countries or companies may have been involved in sabotaging them. Some of these rumors have spread to Taiwan, which says it has been monitoring the situation and investigating, and it's now been forced to push back repeatedly on suggestions that the pagers were made in Taiwan. Well, I'm joined now by William Yang, a freelance journalist based in Taipei. William, first of all, just give us a brief rundown, perhaps, of how Taiwan got involved in all of this.
So Taiwan got involved in all of this because the pagers that exploded in Lebanon that hurt and killed several of the Hezbollah members bear the marks and the brand of a Taiwanese company called Gold Apollo. And that's why the incident suddenly had a connection to Taiwan. And so on Wednesday, when the issue immediately broke, the company here was caught off guard. Dozens of journalists from foreign media outlets and local media outlets were gathering outside the company for the entire day to try to get some statements and also clarity from the company's founder regarding whether they in fact did manufacture and ship all the pagers to Lebanon to the Hezbollahs.
Now, Taiwan has been investigating all of this to check whether they actually were involved or not. They have now come back and said they were not, that this was basically all fake. Can you tell us more about what Taiwan's government is saying now and how hard it's pushing to really not be involved?
So the government has come out through different ministries to repeat that same line, that there is no sign that the company Gold Apollo had records of shipping pagers or commodities to Lebanon. And also at the same time, they continue to investigate and question the founder of the company. And he had been released without even bail, and he was only there as a witness. So there's clearly the government trying to double down on this rhetoric that the founder and the company are not responsible for the explosions that took place in Lebanon.
And finally, William, I mean, if, as the New York Times and some report, there are these suggestions that Israel was using a sort of front company that it will have pretended, given the markings, had links to Taiwan. I just wonder if the government has commented on that. Is this going to damage relations between Israel and Taiwan if it's true?
So the government has not really come out to weigh in on that connection between the shell companies and the Israeli intelligence. But the one interesting thing is that the founder of Gold Apollo did mention during his answers and responses to the question from authorities that he found it weird that some of the money that was wired to his company's bank account from the supposed front company in Hungary, in fact, came from a bank in the Middle East. So that raises more, I think, questions regarding whether the Gold Apollo, in fact, did their own due diligence and also, I think, follow up and investigation regarding who they're actually dealing with. But I think it seems pretty clear that Gold Apollo has no idea the actual identity and of their customer that were buying all these pagers. So I think that's one of the other reasons why the authorities had allowed him to be released without facing any potential crimes or charges.
Still more questions than possibly answers on this story. That was William Yang in Taipei. This is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, it is time for a roundup of tech, wizardry, gadgetry, and everything in between. For that, I'm joined now in the studio by David Phelan, Monocle's tech correspondent. Good afternoon, David.
Hello.
Always good to have you here because you bring us stuff. And I have to say, I am personally in the market at the moment for a new phone because mine is completely dying and restarting twice a day for no particular reason. So what have you brought for us?
Well, today is the day. Today is the day that the new iPhone goes on sale, the iPhone 16 series. There are 4. I've brought all 4, actually. This is the iPhone 16 in a beautiful ultramarine finish, which looks great.
I love the colour. Yeah, nice.
You can go for that sort of fluffier pink. That's the 16 Plus, which is a big one. This is the 16 Pro, and this is the 16 Pro Max in what they call desert titanium finish.
Can I also just say I love that the picture comes up of your dog when I bring up this phone, which is also amazing. Lovely, sweet picture.
Thank you.
So what is it about these? Tell us a little bit more. What's special about this version? There are so many iterations at this point of the iPhone.
Absolutely. There are a lot of new features. What's really interesting is that usually the Pro is the one you want because it's got so much more. But this year, Apple has put so much of the new features into the regular phone as well. There's actually a much smaller gap between them. I think a lot of people who would normally choose the Pro will go for a regular iPhone 16 or 16 Plus. It's got, weirdly, you'd never think Apple would add a button, but they've added this little button on the right-hand side, which if you press it, you'll see it. It's a shutter button. If you press it once, it'll launch the camera. If you press it again, it'll take a picture. But it's also a capacitive button, so you can slide your finger back and forth, and it'll zoom in and out, for example. It does other features
on the button
as well.
itself. Oh, yeah. I see. I'm doing that right now. That is very handy. That's like you don't have to open the phone anymore. You can do all the 4-hour picture happy generation.
Exactly. Yeah, you can even open the phone in your pocket with one press and then click when it's out. People thought that would just be on the Pro version, but no, it's in both. It's also got a much newer processor in all the phones because Apple Intelligence is coming. Their take on AI, which will help us to write better emails. It'll summarize things. You'll be able to point the camera at something. It'll tell you what you're looking at. All those things are coming in the next few months, but the processor is there to allow them.
The competition over AI gets extra heated in the next few months. Let's move on to one more. We also have from Apple the Apple Watch.
Yes.
What's new with that one?
Well, this is the one that isn't new. It's the Apple Watch Ultra 2, but it's now come out in a brand new color, that black, which I think looks 10 times better. I like the previous one, but it looks a lot better now. But if you compare it to the one I'm just sliding off my wrist now, this is the Apple Watch Series 10, which actually has a bigger screen than the Ultra, but it looks much smaller because the bezels are much tinier on the Series 10. That's the lightest and thinnest Apple Watch yet, but it does have the biggest screen. I liked the Ultra until now, but I'm very much leaning back towards the Series 10 because it is so elegant.
I was going to say, as a party, the elegance and just a little bit lighter.
Yes, absolutely.
That's something that people were complaining about from watches when it comes to Apple. You just have this massive thing on your
Yeah,
wrist.
absolutely. Yeah.
And what kind of features are new on this? I mean, I'm also just curious in general what your sense is of how well the watch has done. Do people want the watch? What are the features of a watch compared to the phone that really give you an edge?
Well, the watch is 10 years old as of last week, and it started off as a kind of do-everything watch. Now it's very much goes big on health features, and the new one has sleep apnea detection. So if you wear that watch at night, and obviously the Ultra is heavier to wear at night than the regular one, it will spot whether you have breathing disturbances, and there's a new Vitals app, and it will and now a Translate app on the watch as well. But the Vitals app will get together all your health information and tell you how things are going.
That could also help for relationships if it helps people not to have to tell their partner quietly that you were snoring last night. You can just check your check your watch.
Yes, I'm sure that they will reply, no, darling, the watch is picking up your snores.
Well, let's move on to one more that you have for us, the Remarkable Paper Pro. Tell us about this.
This is the latest tablet from Remarkable, which is, it's not like other tablets. It uses e-paper as the Kindle does, but this is from the Norwegian company that is interested in, you'll see it's got a stylus snapped on the side.
You do have the stylus, yes.
Yes,
okay.
and you can scribble on it. What's new about this is it's got a colour screen. It's a very subtle colour, but you mostly see it. I've highlighted some of the text, and it shows you, it shows up in these very pale things. But you will have experienced from just using that stylus there that there is a feeling that is much closer to pen on paper than a regular stylus on a regular tablet, and that's one of the things that Remarkable is known for doing things that are much more like paper. And also, that's a very, very plain screen that you're looking at, because the idea is that you can immerse yourself in it, nothing to distract you, no notifications coming in or emails or the latest social media. It's there so you can jot down your ideas. You can turn those into text, and you can save them digitally.
This is sort of for us, either journalists or authors who really want to have that feel of note-taking, even if my handwriting is awful and I'm generally illegible, which I have done here. I have written something that is completely illegible, but I guess it kind of goes back to those days of being able to write on a tablet.
Well, it's true. Yeah, we don't write as much as we used to, do we?
These are the new days. Who is this for, would you say?
I think it's a lot of people, certainly writers, as you say, but I think people who creative people who want to get their ideas down before they vanish in a way that typing might be too much of a barrier. And once they're there, then you can save them and share them across other devices as well.
That is something that could be promising. Maybe first draft of a new book, those sorts of things. Many options. David Phelan, thank you very much for joining us. As always, love all the gadgets that you bring for me to show. That is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer. Our researchers were Gunnar Grunlund and Sana Jumani. Our studio manager was Steph Chungu. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Jermack. Goodbye, have a good weekend, and thanks for listening.